William Ruto's criticism of the African Union. Has the AU failed Africa? Kenyan President William Ruto declared that the African Union is not fit for purpose, marking one of the most discussed criticisms of African diplomacy in recent years. The statement sparked debate across the continent, but behind the controversy lies a more profound question. Has the African Union failed to respond effectively to Africa's growing conflicts and humanitarian crises? The African Union was established in 2002 to replace the Organization of African Unity. Its mission was ambitious: promote peace, security, African unity, democracy, and economic integration. Unlike its predecessor, the AU promised not to remain silent in the face of war crimes, genocide, and unconstitutional changes of government. Yet more than 2 decades later, Africa continues to face some of the world's deadliest crises, and critics argue that the AU has often appeared reactive, divided, underfunded, and politically weak. In Sudan, a devastating conflict between the Sudanese armed forces and the Rapid Support Forces has displaced millions of people and created one of the world's worst humanitarian disasters. Thousands have been killed, entire cities have been destroyed, and millions face hunger, displacement, and insecurity. Yet despite repeated statements and emergency meetings, the African Union has struggled to mediate a lasting ceasefire or lead a decisive continental response. In the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, armed conflicts involving rebel groups such as M23 continue to destabilize the region. For decades, violence has displaced millions and fueled one of the longest humanitarian crises in modern African history. Regional tensions remain high, but many Africans question whether the AU possesses either the political unity or institutional capacity needed to resolve such conflicts effectively. Across the Sahel, military coups, insurgencies, and extremist violence have expanded rapidly. Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger have experienced repeated political instability, while armed groups linked to extremist organizations continue to spread across borders. The AU has suspended governments after coups and issued condemnations, but critics argue that declarations alone have not prevented democratic backsliding or worsening insecurity. Beyond armed conflict, Africa faces growing humanitarian emergencies linked to climate change, food insecurity, displacement, and economic instability. Millions across the continent depend on humanitarian assistance, yet the African Union remains heavily dependent on external funding for peacekeeping and emergency operations. This dependence has raised difficult questions about whether the AU can truly act independently during continental crises. For supporters of William Ruto's criticism, the issue is not whether the African Union matters, it is whether the institution can reform itself fast enough to meet Africa's current realities. Many argue that the AU suffers from slow decision-making, lack of enforcement power, political divisions among member states, and limited financial independence. Others warn that weakening the AU without building stronger continental institutions could create even greater instability. The African Union was created to give Africa a stronger collective voice, but today, many Africans are asking whether that voice is being heard in the places that matter most, those devastated by war, hunger, displacement, and political collapse. William Ruto's statement resonated because it reflected a growing frustration across the continent. It is not simply frustration with one institution, but frustration with the gap between Africa's promises of unity and the reality faced by millions affected by conflict and humanitarian crises. The future of the African Union may depend on whether it can move beyond declarations and summits and prove that it is capable of protecting African lives in moments of crisis.